Be prepared for the coup of the century. Be prepared for the murkiest scam. Hyenas are members of the family Hyenidae, which resides in the order Carnivora, and despite the way they look and despite the way they act, hyenas are not actually closely related to dogs. In fact, they are among the feliforms, the cat-like carnivores. The closest family to hyenas, I believe, are the mongooses. And hyenas are interesting because hyenas used to be a lot more abundant in prehistory. There was a lot more different types of hyenas. They were actually quite a widespread group of carnivores, and today there aren't really that many of them left. There are only 4 species, and there are 2 main divisions among the hyenas. I would say there are the insectivorous ones, things like aardwolves, which are small, feed on insects, and the larger, more carnivorous ones, which are represented by 3 species alive today, and actually 3 genus. So actually none of them are actually closely related at all. The striped hyena and the brown hyena, which are a bit closer than they are to the spotted hyena, which is by far the most abundant and the most successful of the species alive today. And the 3 of those species, despite not being closely related, do have some things in common. They all have pretty interesting scent marking, which is a lot more similar to cats and other feliforms. They use it to mark their territories by basically rubbing a gland against the tree as opposed to urinating on it like a lot of caniforms do. All of the carnivorous hyenas have a very strong bite. It's actually the strongest of any large carnivore. It's often said that if a dog bites you, you'll get a lot of tissue damage. If a cat bites you, you'll get a lot of bone damage. And if a hyena bites you, you will probably lose that part of your body. Brown and striped hyenas aren't that social, though they do interact with each other. They live in very small groups. Spotted hyenas, however, are much closer to dogs in that respect. And it's interesting that among all the feliforms, hyenas are the ones that are closest to dogs in terms of their niche, especially spotted hyenas, but the others do look a bit dog-like as well. But the differences are there. Obviously their bite force is much stronger than any dogs. Even the way they socialise is different. Spotted hyenas live in very female-dominated clans, but they're not quite as close as dog packs are. You still have a dominant female, which is really the only one that will reproduce, but they don't den together because hyena cubs are much more independent from birth than dog pups are, and they will kill and eat each other. But other than that, they are actually pretty similar to dogs. They hunt in a very similar way. Their paws are much more similarly to dogs, though in the African plains compared to African wild dogs, hyenas are a lot bigger and more robust. Their calls are very interesting, very unique call, and that vocalization is probably the thing that most people know about hyenas, especially spotted ones, because it sounds like laughing. The idea of a laughing hyena, it's something that's pretty much etched in our minds. Hyenas and humans have had a pretty interesting relationship over the years. As I've said in the past about other things like crocodiles, lions and elephants, we are African mammals. We evolved in the African plains alongside a lot of animals, among them hyenas, especially spotted hyenas, and we would have been hunted by a lot of animals, things like lions, leopards. Hyenas would have taken us as well. I don't think hyenas would have hunted us as much as other animals though. If you look at today, hyenas do still hunt and kill people, but it's not that common compared to things like leopards or lions. It's definitely a lot rarer. It's generally bigger hyenas and it's generally going after sicker humans. Unlike a lot of animals, the majority of humans that have been eaten by hyenas have actually been scavenged. Hyenas do very well in instances where plagues take place, but I think the closest humans and hyenas have actually gone was actually when we left Africa, because much like lions and elephants, hyenas were also present across Eurasia, and in fact we would have definitely competed with them for prey and space, because cave hyenas generally obviously lived in caves, much like early humans did. We would have been competing with them for those spaces, and early hunter-gatherer humans would have hunted similar prey to hyenas, so we definitely would have competed with them. It's actually suggested that the reason it took humans so long to cross the Bering Strait into Alaska was actually because of competition with cave hyenas throughout Siberia, and eventually we outcompeted them because there's only one species of hyena left in Eurasia, and that's the striped hyena. Ultimately, humans have won that war, and humans have generally always had a pretty negative attitude towards hyenas, probably because they scavenge. I think that's probably the big thing. The fact that they look pretty minging compared to lions or other African carnivores, things like leopards or even wild dogs, they just don't look as nice, and that laughter as well is not great, as opposed to a lion, which is a very regal looking predator. A laughing hyena almost acts like it's not to be taken seriously. Most cultures that come into contact with hyenas generally associate them with sickness or, trickery or voodoo in some cases. There have been a few instances of hyenas popping up in pop culture, but usually they're seen as a sort of secondary antagonist. That's been seen in some adaptations of The Jungle Book and in various animated media. Hyenas are always laughing on the sidelines, and they're often just, again, not to be taken seriously. The most famous hyenas in pop culture I can think of are the ones that pop up in The Lion King, and again, they are essentially Scar's henchmen. Scar, the much more regal lion villain, as opposed to the hyenas, which are banished to the elephant graveyard and only let back into the Pride Lands, only to basically drive it to ruin. It does portray them in a very negative light. It shows that really negative disdain that we have for them, and that even bleeds into documentaries. Hyenas are almost always the villains in any natural history series, whenever there's an excuse to have an animal pitted against another in the African plains, it's almost always hyenas, whether that be lions, African wild dogs, cheetahs. In the series Dynasties, every single episode that took place in Africa, the baddies were always the hyenas. Even the episode that dealt with hyenas, the hyenas were the baddies. I think that's actually a bit unfair, and I think that's because our conception of them is pretty negative. It's about them being scavengers, stealing the kills of other animals, being very unclean. And that is true, but hyenas are very competent predators. Hyenas are among the most successful predators in Africa, and there's actually very little footage out there of them hunting. The only time I've seen hyenas hunting I can think was in Dynasties, in that hyenas episode. We generally hold wild dogs up on a pedestal for being really successful hunters. Hyenas are just as successful. They're actually really effective. And I was looking into threats to hyenas and how hyenas aren't really doing very well, but actually, hyenas are actually doing okay. Spotted hyenas are among the most successful predators in Africa, and they're pretty abundant. Even brown hyenas, striped hyenas, aardwolves even, they're all doing okay compared to other animals. Spotted hyenas are considered least concern under the IUCN Red List, which is very interesting. That's very rare for a large mammal, to be honest. So that kind of speaks to how successful they are. And I think that negative perception is very unearned. They have the same capacity for sociality that dogs have. And again, we often put dogs and wolves and other wild dogs on a pedestal in a way that we would never do with hyenas. But hyenas, again, are very similar, and they can even be trained like dogs. People have owned hyenas as pets throughout the years. So I think hyenas are almost viewed as the kind of villainous, disgusting dog. But if you take away the words villainous and disgusting away, you've basically got the same kind of animal as a dog. And we obviously love dogs, so in a way, we should probably like hyenas a lot more than we do. So to summarise, hyenas are very cool animals. There aren't that many of them left. There's only 4 species, but they lack an abundance of species. They make up for an abundance of numbers. Hyenas are doing a lot better than a lot of other predators, and that's probably because they're able to diversify their niche. They're scavengers and predators. Despite not being related to them, they are very similar to dogs, and yet we choose not to see them in as positive a light as we do dogs. We've interacted with them throughout our histories, generally in very negative ways, whether that was in cases of predation, competition, or generally just the negative way we view them in our mythology and our pop culture. But ultimately, hyenas are very successful animals, they're very competent predators, and all the things that we like about dogs are also present in hyenas. So maybe we should look upon them in a more favourable light. Yeah, let me know in the comments below what you thought of this video. Have you got any hyena stories? Aside from being woken up by hyenas in Africa, the most interesting hyena encounter I ever had was hyena cubs coming up to a vehicle I was in and just hanging around the car. Like, I got great videos of them. It was really cool. It was a really, really special moment, I thought. I really liked hyenas. Yeah, I've always seen hyenas as really cool animals. I've always thought they were very unfairly viewed by us, and maybe that is something that should change because they are really cool and really impressive animals. I like them. So yeah, let me know in the comments below what you'd like me to talk about next. I've obviously got a list, but if you give me recommendations, that's always appreciated. And yeah, as ever, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, or don't if you don't want it, it's perfectly fine. And I'll see you next time, and goodbye.